Welcome to Simply by Grace, a podcast of Grace Life Ministries with founder and director Dr. Charlie Bing. This podcast and other helpful resources can be found at our website, gracelife.org. Now, here's Dr. Bing.
The story that you will hear today, I think, will be very interesting to you, and it may take you down some roads you've never thought of traveling before. Recently, I saw the movie Jesus Revolution, and my friend today was actually part of that in Southern California some years ago. I came to know Christ not long after that movement started. So I think you'll find his story interesting. Ed has been a friend since seminary days, and we've remained friends and worked together in ministry and still collaborate somewhat in ministry today. And he's had a rich and fruitful life of ministry. He's written some books that you'll hear about. But I want you to hear from his own story with his own words about how he came to know the Lord and what's been going on since then. So welcome, Ed.
Hey, Charlie, it's good to be here. Really good to be here with you. Good to see you too.
Well, always good to see you. We always get to talking about a lot of different things. So
yeah, we do, don't we?
Maybe we
way back, man. Way back. Yeah.
Maybe we can be disciplined enough to get through this without
That's right.
without doing a 4-hour Joe Rogan thing.
Yeah.
I don't think we're as interesting as him, probably, but depends on your perspective. Well, look, Ed, people want to get to know you. Presently, it might be good to start out with what you're doing at present. You work with after a long pastoral career, you're working with the group called Recentered, which how would you define the purpose of that?
Well, Recentered, after 21 years at Church of the Open Door here in Southern California and going through all that experience, and I just became burdened with pastors and the loneliness of pastors. I really became burdened with unhealthy church leadership teams. Had a horrible experience myself that where Judy and I lost a church we loved because we didn't take care of leadership relationships. So a couple of things were really percolating with me, and I'd already begun to work with pastors, younger pastors, and I really had a heart for them. But I just thought I was with a group of guys that are really close. And I said, they said, what do you want to do after Church of the Open Door? I said, I want to help churches get back to what matters most to Jesus. And that's the Great Commission, to make disciples, and the Great Commandment, to love one another. We're not loving one another well as leaders. I'm talking about as leaders.
Yeah.
And I don't, whatever people might think, I just know because I'm out there, most churches are not making disciples. And so that's what I do. I work with churches every once in a while. It's really a joy. I get to work with a healthy church, and I just get to move them towards a disciple-making culture, help them do that. Or I'll work with a church that has a lot of tension going on, a lonely pastor, whatever that is. And so I just jump right in. It always reminds me, I was an Army officer, and I went to jump school. And one of the things they said before you jumped was "no guts, no glory," and that's kind of the way I feel with Recentered. I just jump right in with these lonely pastors, with these really, really tense leadership situations, but also help build a healthy leadership culture by loving one another well as leaders, and help build a disciple-making culture. Hopefully, a layered disciple-making culture.
Yeah, well, I know
involves every age group,
You've been very effective at doing that, I think, in it just a well-suited ministry for you. But let's back it up, and I whetted people's curiosity about your salvation,
right?
Southern California. So tell us a little bit about that, and did the Jesus movie reflect that very well? That's a second question, really, but I really want to hear your story.
Yeah, well, the first would be my story. I grew up in the southern end of what's called the Central Valley, the San Joaquin Valley, in a town called Bakersfield, kind of a redneck town. It's where all the Okies stopped when they came, and I grew up in that culture, so country music and all of that. But I was a '60s kid, and anything that was going on in the '60s, I was a part of it. I was Judy, my wife Judy, and I we are both first generation Christians. Neither one of us grew up in a Christian home.
Mhm.
To me, Jesus was simply half a cuss word. That's really all
Mm.
he meant to me. And I was a partier. I did, fortunately for me, I graduated from high school in 1968, which when I wrote a book about it called Reborn to Be Wild, I found out it's the most tumultuous year in American history. Think about that, even including the Civil
Oh, is
War.
that right?
Yeah, it was when the country's been most divided. And so I was just an angry 17, 18-year-old. And I had always been like in rapid learners. I knew I was smart, but man, I just spun out. I didn't care about anything. And my only plan was that I was probably going to get drafted, go to Vietnam, get killed. And I honestly didn't care. I found nothing worth living for except partying. And I hung out and we just partied hard. I remember I flunked I flunked out of the little junior college there in Bakersfield because every time I go to the parking lot, somebody would be going water skiing or surfing. And I go, oh yeah, I can go. I was an absolute mess. And then the Jesus movement came along. And what happened was we started getting these rumors that friends of ours, and then we started calling them Jesus freaks.
Yeah.
And we started getting these rumors that friends of ours were, and I had gone to Young Life in high school. I didn't like it much, but most of it because of the girls that were there. That's why I went. And I don't remember a thing they ever said. But we had these friends and then just like we used to say they're falling like flies, man. So two of these guys, Phil Walker, who's now my brother-in-law, and a guy by the name of Bobby Rader, just stuck with me. They stuck with me, and I did everything I could to get them off my back. And one day Bobby came over to see me after, and unusually, I'll just put it this way, all you need to know is that we went to Tijuana. Bobby wasn't a part of that, but I just got back from Tijuana.
Okay.
And he said, well, you gotta watch Billy's on tonight. That's what we call Billy Graham. Called him Billy. And so I listened to one of Billy Graham's crusades coming out of Anaheim. That was probably 69 by then, something around there. I was out of high school. And anyway, I went over to Bobby's house and I was going to drive over there. And I remember, so I said, I got to talk to Bobby. And I drove over there and I said, I'm not going to do this. And he was standing out in his front yard of all things.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, hey, Bob, I just need this Jesus. I don't know, man. I got to do something. And he took me over to a guy by the name of Keith Osborne. And Keith Osborne was our Young Life leader. And I think about it now, as a pastor, it was 9:00 at night. He comes driving in. He had been to some Young Life thing. He comes driving into his home, and there's Bobby and me on the front porch. And he set me down on a curb and explained the gospel. And I trusted Christ that night, and grace changed everything. I still remember him going to the part, where the angels rejoice. And he said, the angels are having a party tonight because of you. And I was just so new to me, everything was so new. So that was a Jesus movement, and it was true revival. And what people don't understand is, and this is what I tried to get across in Reborn to Be Wild, the book that I wrote about it, is that you don't know when you come to Christ in revival, you don't know it. You just think that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And, so I came to Christ 3 weeks later. I was a Young Life leader at Bakersfield High School, 300 Young Life kids. I mean, I knew John 3:16, and that was it. We just stayed a block ahead of the hounds. We were so ill-equipped, but it was a revival. We would drive down to Southern California. Interesting enough to come to church at the Open Door. The church
did you at that point?
Yeah.
Who was pastor then?
J. Vernon McGee.
And
I still remember guys told me I couldn't get enough of the Bible. And every time I'd go to a church, I'd get kicked out because of long hair, and they didn't want us Jesus freaks. Finally, it was a Dallas grad, a guy by the name of Ted Stone. And I mean, that's why I went to Dallas Seminary. That's all I knew. And Ted Stone started discipling me. But we would go down to Southern California and join up with Young Life guys and with Campus Crusade guys. And, we'd do outrageous things. We'd stand on the beach at Huntington Beach and point up and gather a crowd. And while people were surfing and say, "What are you looking up there for? We're going to tell you about who's up there." Go to the Rose Parade and hand out tracts. We were on fire, man. And I just couldn't get enough of the Bible. And then I still remember Ted, his name's Ted Stone. He's in heaven now. But I was looking for, and I had all these questions. And I went, the first time was back when they had overhead projectors. And I still remember, Ted, man, he was in 1 Corinthians. And he's putting Greek words up there. I was like, "Whoa, man, this is." I didn't even know that existed.
Wow.
A friend of mine, Bobby, the guy that led me to Christ, he went to Biola to play baseball, and he took me to Biola, where I taught there while I was here in Southern California with Church at the Open Door. And I remember saying, "There's a whole college about the Bible." I just couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe any of that. So that's how I came to Christ. It was a Jesus movement, and through Young Life and Campus Crusade, that was our group. Yeah.
I'll just interject here something which is interesting, little side story. But last month when I was in Africa, it was recommended to me that I have lunch with somebody that was an American missionary. So I arranged a lunch. I'd never met him, and so we met with he and his wife. His name's Tom Molinar. I told you this already. And he was your first convert. He said you led him to the Lord. Yeah. Isn't that a small world? I was just stunned to hear that over there.
Yeah. Tommy Molinar I went to high school with him and we hung out. He didn't run with my crowd. Tommy was far more subdued than I was, but I knew him. I grew up with him. And I just saw him on the campus at the junior college, that I'd already flunked out of. Anyway, but I was there doing evangelism that day. Wow. And Tommy came by, and that's what we did. We would just go places and do evangelism. And I talked to him. I said, "You ever think about Jesus?" And he said, "No, not really." I said, "Well, here's a tract." And he goes, "Yeah, you and Bobby." And I said, "Yeah, that's what we're doing." And I just gave him a tract. And I saw him the next day, and he was in tears. And he said, "Yeah, last night in the shower, I read through it, and I did it, man. I gave my life to Christ." So Tommy was the first guy. It was quite a connection.
Yeah, that's amazing. And he's actively sharing the gospel today in South Africa. So you ought to be very gratified about that.
Oh, I am. Yeah.
So it's good to always see somebody get converted and start sharing their faith right away. But at some point, you have to get some more ammunition, so to speak. Maturity and so forth. Where did you go from there? I know you worked for the Forest Service at some point. Was that after you believed?
No, that was before enduring. So I worked for the Forest Service. I was a fireman, and the year before I came to Christ, I was on a suppression crew in the Kern Canyon, and we were out of control. It's a hard life being a fireman, and we partied all the time. We'd drive into Bakersfield, we'd drive back up Kern Canyon drunk. That was before I came to Christ. And then even then the next summer, they took us to we went to Fulton Ranger Station, and that's where we became a hotshot crew. So I spent 1 year at Rich Bar, and it was during that summer. After that summer and before the next fire season was when I came to Christ. And so I was already a Young Life leader, and then went back to the Forest Service that combined two crews, and we made up the Fulton Hotshots. So I fought fire with the Fulton Hotshots for 7 years, 7 fire seasons. Some of those fire seasons were breveted because once I got my life straightened out, I went back to school and never made a B. It's interesting. Yeah. And I went to UC Santa Barbara on an ROTC scholarship. Judy and I got married, and we were I can remember Ted asked us what we argued about, and we said nothing. And he said, "Well, you will." And on the way home, I still remember this. We were talking because neither one of us came from a Christian home. We just thought all problems solved, right?
Yeah.
So on the way home, I looked at Judy and I said, "Ted actually thinks we're going to argue." She said, "We'll just pray." That was our one one and only plan. After I got married, that lasted about 3.5 minutes. But anyway, it was a great thing to be a brand new Christian. And so Judy and I moved up to Fulton, and we lived at Fulton Ranger Station. Our first daughter, Amy, was born, and I took her there. Judy used to cook for the Fulton Hot Shots. It's just fascinating. And then I went back to UC Santa Barbara on an ROTC scholarship. Went back and fought fire during the summers when I wasn't going to training because it was really, really good money. And then we had Bob, our second, while I was at UC Santa Barbara. And then we headed to Germany. And I was an armor officer, and I served my time in a place called Ansbach, Germany, during the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
Then we were involved in Officers Christian Fellowship there. So just about all of my growth had come through Ted Stone, who discipled me. The discipleship of Campus Crusade, they had that 10 basic lessons. The discipleship of Young Life, and then when we got over to Germany, it was Officers Christian Fellowship, which was just a small group Bible study. And we just discipled each other. Most of the chaplains weren't, if they were believers, they weren't that mature.
Yeah. So how long were you in the service?
I was in for almost just about 4 years. And it was really the most difficult decision we ever made. It surprised us how much we loved the Army.
Mm-hmm.
Judy and I absolutely loved it. We loved the culture. We had probably the most fruitful discipleship, but especially evangelistic ministry we've ever had, because, we were in Germany. There was all we had was each other. Nobody had, there was no relatives. And so we did all Christmas together, all those things. And we had a really good OCF, Officers Christian Fellowship group. And so we grew. And then I resigned my commission and put in my I already put in my application to Dallas Seminary and a couple other places. And then we came back home and waited for the news. And Judy wanted to go to Western Seminary because she always loved the Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's interesting. My first contact with Earl Rodmacher was welcoming me to Western Seminary. But by then I knew I was going to Dallas because that had always been our dream. So yeah, we went to Dallas, and that's where we met. I was there. We met down there in the weight room.
Yeah, we met there, lifting weights. Yeah. Those were good days.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
So you still get to enjoy the Army vicariously through your son, who's done quite well making it a career. I'll let you talk about him a little bit.
Well, Bob is he's a colonel now, a full colonel. He went to West Point, and class of 99 out of West Point. And then he was with the 3rd Infantry Division, and 9/11. After 9/11, that was his first time to war, was with the 3rd Infantry Division. If you remember, the 3rd Infantry Division went left, the Marines went right when we invaded Baghdad. So he was with the 3rd Infantry Division. He's an armor officer himself. And so he was at war with the 3rd Infantry Division all the way. And then he was a captain by the time he went to war with them.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, he came out here to Fort Irwin here in Southern California. We were so thrilled because he was with the 11th Cav, and they were not supposed to deploy. They were like, if you've watched Top Gun, Fort Irwin is it's a Top Gun for tanks and infantry and stuff. And the 11th Cav wasn't supposed to deploy. They're the ones that everybody fights. But he deployed again out of there with the 11th Cav, went to Baghdad for a year. And then after that, we got a reprieve. He went to West Point to teach, and that was really, really good. From there, he went to, Fort Hood. Went back to war out of Fort Hood. That's time he went to Afghanistan. So he's had 3 tours of war. Those are long years. Came back and went to Fort Benning, and then the Army sent him to Oxford. Yeah, so he was at Oxford for 3 years. Those are wonderful years where, he once again, he couldn't deploy.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't have to worry about him going to war. And then right out of Oxford, he deployed with the 1st to 4th Cav. He commanded 1st to 4th Cavalry. Interesting, it was Robert E. Lee's last federal. He resigned his Army commission and went from 1st to the 4th Cav.
Wow.
So like him in the commander's office, former commanders, one of them's Robert E. Lee. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, he went from there to Poland and Hungary and Germany, trained on some of the same places I trained. From there, he went to NATO. He was at NATO in Brussels for 2 years, and now he's at the Pentagon. So we're glad to have him home.
Yeah. Well, we're grateful for you and his service. I can say that for everybody.
Well, mostly him. Nobody ever shot at me. I just worked long hours.
Yeah, but you had to change his diapers. So
yeah, I did. Yeah, in between going to the field. Yeah.
So you went to Dallas Seminary and you graduated with your THM.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And did you plunge immediately into pastoral ministry?
I did right away. I just had no other plan, and an Army buddy. So I was older than most of the guys because I'd been in the Army. Besides that, I spun out. I didn't go to college till I was later too. So I think I started seminary at like 33. No, younger than that, maybe 29. Anyway, I was 35 when I graduated, and I had an Army buddy in Detroit, and there was a church up there, and I went up there and I did the whole candidating thing. I knew nothing, Charlie. I mean, I knew nothing about church. I had my Jesus Movement church, and then Officers Christian Fellowship, and suddenly it was in Detroit, Michigan. It was Midwest, so I didn't get that culture. It was real formal for me.
Yeah.
And it was a denominational church. And anyway, we were oil and water, and learned a lot of lessons, made a lot of mistakes. But one good thing came out of that was Kevin Butcher and I didn't hardly know him at all during seminary, but he was in Kokomo. He was down by Taylor University. Anyway, that's where we got to know each other again. Mm-hmm. And then that's where we like hooked up with you again in the organization we were working for back then.
Yeah.
So, but I was only 3 years there, and then that's when we went to Oregon, and it was pretty much a church plant when I went to Oregon. Mm-hmm. And that was the church that we loved. Remember, you came and spoke there many times.
Yeah.
And I just thought, this is where I'm going to raise my kids. And that's where I got this thing about, first of all, discipleship. That came from Howard Hendricks. I just knew I was going to be a disciple maker. And then, by the way, we also had Celia while I was at Dallas. So that we have 3 now. And then, and 9 grandchildren. So then we went to, when we left, it was real painful when we left the church in Oregon. And it was all because we didn't pay attention to our leadership relationships. And that's where I get this passion for that. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I went to, the famous Church of the Open Door down in Southern California. Had just split over a subject that you and I it's close to both of our hearts. I had split over the issue of lordship salvation.
Yeah, and I hate to admit that the person who was in charge of that split, I guess, at pastor at the time was a friend of mine in Bible college. But
yes, I remember us talking about that. Yeah, I've never met him, but so I came to Church of the Open Door, and it was there were only 120 people, and you've been there, you've seen the acreage and all that.
Yeah, beautiful.
So it was really, really, really tense. Those first 4 years were tough because we were trying to bring change. And fortunately for me, we had really, really good elders, and the church was wounded, and Judy and I were wounded. It's just amazing that we trusted each other, but we did. Mm-hmm. And it was a one time, I still remember, we were flying back up to Oregon, and I looked at Judy because Judy did not want to leave the Northwest. We had a grandson there. We left a grandson there. Uh-huh. And so I was really trying to be careful, and I went down, and we were flying home after a week down here. And I said, well, sweetie, what do you think? And she said, I think we're called. And it's the only time I could ever say it. I felt called to do that. So we knew what we were getting into, and it took a long time to turn the church around. But what healed the church, I can't take any credit for what healed the church. I thought I was doing all the right things. I launched discipleship. We launched small groups. all of that was a war, because it was new to everybody, and they still kind of wanted to be the famous church, you know.
Yeah. So this church had at one time, how big had it been?
Oh, it was 4,000 when it was downtown.
4,000 down to 120 people when you got there.
It was down to 120 because it split twice. There was a good friend of ours who had a moral failure. You remember that?
Yeah.
And by the way, his wife became my administrative assistant for 20 years. Wonderful lady, his ex-wife. And then the next guy came in, your friend from Bible college, and he told him that he wasn't a Lordship Salvation guy, but he was.
Yeah.
And since I had written on it, and since I had articles published by the same group you were involved with, they called me, and we went down there, and but it was down to 120 people, really, really divided. Pretty old. So the average age was probably 65.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet people, but they really had no other category except for the way things had been downtown. When they had J. Vernon McGee and everything was rocking and rolling.
Yeah, they used to be downtown before you moved out to the country in that beautiful campus.
Yeah, so I was the friend of ours was the one who moved the church up there in '85. In fact, J. Vernon McGee preached his very last sermon out there on that lawn in front of the gym. You can picture that, right?
Yeah.
His very last sermon there, and it was on. I'm going to tell you about the most dangerous doctrine in the world today. It's called Lordship Salvation. That was his last sermon.
That was his last sermon. How about
it? It was his last sermon, and good for him. Good for him.
That's good. Yeah. So just to jump ahead and give people an idea, some perspective, when you retired a few years ago, how many were going to the church?
Oh, we had about 600. But what was really interesting was how unimportant that was.
Yeah.
Because we had true community. We just had we have still today. I handed over to a man named Dave Anderson. He's been a real good steward of the church. But obviously, we emphasized grace, the gospel of grace. I wrote discipleship materials. We started using that. We wrote discipleship into every job description. And so we had a really, really healthy, sweet community of 600. We sent missionaries again. It was it was a totally act of God, but it was healthy, and it still remains healthy. Really, really healthy. Great community, a lot of discipleship, layered discipleship. Junior hires discipling grade school kids, high school kids discipling junior hires. So you just love that part of it, and the leaders are what I'm doing with Recentered was what I did there. We're just honest and open and vulnerable, and we say what we mean, and we don't put up with any of the Jesus jukes that people that Christian leaders will use to get their way. We just don't put up with it. So but what healed the church 4 years in was that I almost died.
Yeah, tell that story. That's what your book was about.
Yeah,
When God Breaks Your Heart.
Yeah,
excellent book.
Yeah. So I was gone. I got it in 2000. I have a chronic leukemia, and it's 23 years later, and I'm still alive. Very thankful. But it was stage 4, cutaneous T-cell lymphoma, probably an Agent Orange thing, because we used to spray Agent Orange in the Forest Service. And so I was gone for a year. And what the Holy Spirit did during that year was, the way it can be in a divided church, that really everybody kind of really wants to be together. The average person doesn't really care about the things that everybody's arguing over. And what we found was, while I was gone, people just stood up to those dividers and said, look, Ed's our pastor. We're going to be a church. We're moving this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a real big movement of God. I write about it. I still remember I came back the first day back after being gone for so long. I said, for those of you who are new, my name's Ed Underwood, and I'm still the pastor of Church of the Open Door. It's a standing ovation. It's just one of those moments in your life. That's
amazing. But you had actually given up on God in that.
Oh, at the beginning? Oh, you bet I did. Oh, yeah. And I tell the story about it. Physical suffering is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And But the disease that I have, cutaneous T-cell lymphoma, the number one reason for death with this is suicide.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's just so miserable. It's like it's like the worst case of poison oak you've ever had with the worst sunburn you've ever had put together. And you can't keep your skin on. And so they were just trying everything. I was going to USC Medical Center and really, really good doctors there. First, they saved me my life the night I almost died. And then since then, they've tuned me up and I don't take as many meds as I used to. But yeah, I still remember the night that it happened. Judy said, "Let's pray." I said, "I'm not going to pray. I'm not going to pray." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "You can't tell me that God's my father. I'm a father. Look at me." And my skin was coming off. I just looked like I looked ghoulish. And I said, "Look at me, Judy. You can't tell me he loves me. And then he lets this happen to me." I'll never forget what she did. She turned over and she said, "All right, God, we're mad at you tonight." And the next morning she went to work, and I was so angry that I had thrown my Bible into the corner. And the next morning I said, "Okay, I'm just going to try this. I know the Holy, I knew I wasn't giving up, but it just felt like it." And I turned to John 11, and that's what the book's about. How John 11, and the experience, not of Lazarus, but of Mary and Martha, really, really turned me around. And I can still remember once I got straightened out again and started, I was just writing blogs. You might have been, I was writing emails to people to pray for me. You might even have been on that distribution. I think you were.
I was, yes.
Just a really good friends. And then there was the night that I almost died, that guy, Charlie White, who was a retired pastor, he walked into my room and said, "Please let Ed live and serve." And I'm sure you got that email. Judy Kokoris, my secretary, sent it around the world. And we figured out that night about 10,000 people were praying that one sentence prayer. And I'm convinced that's what saved my life. And anyway, so, I slowly gained my health back. I slowly was able to get off the meds, and Church of the Open Door. I was working with the guys at True Face. They were really good friends of mine. And they were coming up with all these great ideas of how to build community and how to build leadership unity. And everything they thought of, I put into Church of the Open Door. They used to tell me, "You're the laboratory where we do True Face." And we were. So we had really fruitful ministry there. We loved it. I would say the last 15 years were an absolute joy. It's just, every pastor knows this, I mean, we still had problems and inappropriate people and everything, but the last 15 years, they're really a joy. And that's part of my heart with what I'm doing right now. I'd love to see more pastors get to live that way.
Yeah. Not many of them are very happy in their ministry.
No, or are they very safe, which is sad. Yeah.
Yeah, that is sad. So before we go on and talk about your ministry today, just can you summarize what is it that you saw in John chapter 11 that brought you back to the Lord? You had given up on him, but he didn't give up on you. Judy didn't give up on God.
No,
he's God's great.
And guys like you and Kevin and all the people that were praying for me. Well, what happened in John 11, a couple of things. The first thing that really hit me was because I remember when I was almost, the night when I was dying, before Charlie came in, had all these people came in and they were praying these prayers, and they were theologically good, nice prayers. You know what I mean? But, they'd be saying things like, "Ed knows you're sovereign," and it just really, like, they'd pass any theological sniff test. And my son had come out from Fort Benning. Our youngest was a sophomore in high school. Judy's there, and I just remember thinking, I'm dying here. Somebody asking for something. And that's when Charlie came in and actually asked. And so what initially attracted me was that they knew that Lazarus was dying, and they send a message to Jesus, who was he's in Perea at the time, and basically a report. And that was the first thing that got my attention. I said, that's not a prayer request. That's a report. That's a report. And then when he finally comes walking in, too late, it seemed to them, both sisters say the same thing to him. If you had been here, my brother would not have died.
Mhm.
And that was my problem. They're just saying, and I'm sure they felt the way I felt. I felt like all I've ever done is serve you. There's got to be some guys that are selling crack somewhere you could give this to. You got to give it to me. I'm one of the good ones. But they are saying the same thing. Jesus used to stay at their house when he would come to Jerusalem. So they were his closest friends. And then the other thing where John is real careful to tell us in the beginning that Jesus loved them. So the rest of the story is built off that. But they both, first Martha and then Mary, they both say the same thing. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. And I said, look, they stole my line. And then I got to John 11:40 when Jesus said, have I not told you? And it's in the imperfect tense, which means a lot to us who know Greek, meaning this is something that he told them over and over and over again. If you believe, you will see the glory of God. If you believe, you will see the glory of God. And it was that sentence that I was just clinging to, when I'm going in for all the treatments, when I'm looking ghoulish, and I had a lot of bad days after that. And I just continued to send out these prayer letters, and I had all this stuff in it. And I was working for the Bruce Wilkinson at the time, doing walkthrough. I was teaching walkthroughs, and I had asked Bruce to disciple me as I took on this assignment at Church of the Open Door, and he did. And he stayed with me, and then he knew I got sick, and I was sending him these newsletters, these prayer requests, and he said, you should make a book out of this. And I remember I wrote him back and I said, easy for you to say prayer of Jabez, man. I don't know how to write a book. And that's when he got me in touch with his agent. And that's how I wrote When God Breaks Your Heart. Yeah.
That's an excellent book. Excellent story in there. One of your takeaways, it seems, from that story in John 11 was that God doesn't need our reports. He needs our prayer requests.
Exactly.
He'd be asking him. And that's what your friend did. He asked you if God let you live.
Charlie's in heaven now, but his whole that same prayer, just about everywhere you've been in the audiences, I always end the same way. I said, please pray that I can live and serve.
Yeah.
I'm a shameless solicitor of prayer.
Well, he tells us to ask, so we should.
Yeah.
Well, I really enjoyed the book. And then you wrote another book called Reborn to be Wild, which is about your testimony in those Jesus days, Jesus movement days.
And if you read it, it's nothing like the Jesus Revolution movie at all. For Judy and me, ours was just a different experience than that.
Yeah.
So I didn't see the Jesus Revolution. Judy went to see it, and she told me about it. And friends of mine from the Jesus movement went to see it, and they thought it was okay. I knew about Lonnie Frisbee. Everybody knew about Lonnie Frisbee. He was a guy on the streets of Hollywood that started the whole thing. And then we all knew about Chuck Smith. And there's those iconic pictures of the baptisms, at Corona del Mar. All the kids on the cliff, and Chuck Smith is baptizing people. That just wasn't the part of the Jesus movement that I was in. I was in the part of the Jesus movement that was more, it was more Young Life, Campus Crusade for Christ, Moody Bible Institute guys, Dallas Seminary guys. So Hal Lindsey had the JC Light and Power Company. That it was a big ministry at UCLA. And it was huge in Southern California. And then there was Campus Crusade, now Cru. They had a thing up at Arrowhead called The Village, and we would go there a lot, and we'd hear great speakers who would come in. So my part of the Jesus movement, we knew who Chuck Smith was, we knew who Lonnie Frisbee was, but that was that. So this was their story, which was a great story, I think. But we weren't a part of that. We never were a part of the Calvary Chapels, which grew out of it. Ours was mostly Moody Bible Institute guys, Young Life guys, and Dallas Seminary guys.
So the
And,
ripple effect from what they started
yep,
spilled out
yep.
into other
Yeah,
arenas.
it was true revival. Plus ours, even though, I mean, we had our rock concerts and we had our music that we loved and all that. But the reason I wrote Reborn to be Wild was I read a couple of historical analyses of the Jesus movement, and they totally missed it. It was all discipleship. It was all discipleship. That was all I remember. I do remember wonderful meetings, you know, at Arrowhead and up at Hume Lake, but that wasn't where it was. I, you know, like I said, I'd been a Christian 3 weeks. I was leading a Young Life Club, and then Young Life has this campaigner thing, which is a serious Bible study. So we just cut our teeth doing discipleship. Yeah.
So that you've written that book, Reborn to be Wild, and what is The Trail about? Another book you've written.
Oh, The Trail was it's an allegory, and so my agent, a guy named Don Jacobson, it was his idea. I think it was a pretty good idea. It didn't sell anything. So it couldn't have been that good of an idea. But anyway, I was doing a series on how to know God's will, primarily from the Psalms. Just these one-liners that I was teaching. You know, when I do a Bible conference somewhere, I was teaching at Ecola Bible College. I was teaching how to know God's will. And the other thing going on, since I worked for the Forest Service, the Golden Trout Wilderness is like my backyard. I know it like the back of my hand. And what I would do with our staff every year is I would take them up to the Golden Trout. Yeah, we'd backpack in and would fish for golden trout. But, you know, we had a couple of guys who were missionaries staying on campus, and they knew how to take care of themselves. But these are all city guys. And and so it's you know, you've been there, you're a hunter, you know what it's like. So you get these guys out in the wilderness, and they know that without you, they're dead. They can't build a fire.
Oh boy!
They can't read a map or a compass.
So you spend all your time babysitting.
I know, yeah. So I just found it a great place to do discipleship because you really have their attention. You had all sorts of. So the idea with the trail was that I would be an old pastor who had worked for the Forest Service, and I would take a brand new Christian couple, up to the Golden Trout Wilderness and talk them through these lessons that I had learned. Then we'd get burned over by a fire and all that. I enjoyed writing the book, and it really. I mean, just had a letter the other day from a lady that said my husband wants more copies, and I said, sorry, out of print. I don't have any left. So yeah,
that's a shame. Maybe people can find a copy somewhere, used bookstores or
probably
used books on Amazon even.
Yeah, or just wait. I'm writing a series now, just a regular series on firefighting. But has nothing to do with Recentered. So, but it's going to be lessons of manhood taught on the fire line. So that really was where I grew up. I mean, that's one of the things God used the Forest Service for, was that it got me away from this wild crowd I was running with. And I was around real men for the first time in my life. Now, of course, it was still a party, you know, thing. We would still drink, but we were up in the mountains. You know, you can only do so much.
Yeah, a lot of responsibility.
Ponderosa pine, but that you can't get in any more trouble than that. And so that was kind of where I got my head a little bit together, where I just wasn't always partying, and then Young Life and all that. That's where I heard the gospel.
Well, your emphasis on discipleship is much needed, and you're writing some materials on that too, right?
Yeah, I'm rewriting Beginning of Grace. I wrote it in '97, and our goal is that it's 7 chapters, just the basics: how to know you're a Christian, how to know your resources in Christ, your identity in Christ, what's the purpose of your salvation off of Ephesians 2:10, Galatians 2:20. Saved by faith, you live by faith, and then it finishes off. It tries to get a person to the point where they understand that the first baby step of following Jesus is baptism. So we try to get them from there to there, and so I'm rewriting it, polishing it up a little. It's 97. It's dated.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about it. It'll be our goal is to have it on Amazon by September, or on recentergroup.com is where people can find out all about it too.
Okay. So look for Beginning in Grace to come up on Amazon.
Right. Beginning in Grace.
Yeah, that'll be good. Well, you're really committed to, in your recentered ministry, to helping pastors, especially, or church governments as well.
Yeah.
And the state of the, just might close with a brief discussion about the state of the church and its pastors and how pastors are treated and how pastors are feeling. I'm sure you have more insight than most people on that.
Yeah, Charlie. Well, you know too. You travel around, you know pastors, but it absolutely breaks your heart. It just breaks your heart. They're people just like you and me. You know, just like you and your bride and Judy and me. We gave up our entire life to go follow Jesus and be a pastor. Mm-hmm. And it's such a waste. Think about this. So I went to Dallas. You and I both went to Dallas Seminary. Over whatever, all those decades, people have given millions and millions and millions of dollars to Dallas Seminary.
Right.
Those professors who touched our lives, they could all be making a lot more money doing something else.
Right.
Then we go to churches where, where people have been a part of that church. They've probably spent thousands or millions on those. And then we have all these programs and pressures and all those things. And the average pastor in America lasts 3 years before they move on. And they can say what they want to say. It's a different philosophy of ministry, theological difference. It's always about relationships. So what I'm finding is that we have a lot of problems in the way we do leadership in the church. We do it in such a way that there's a lot of politicking. There's a lot of talking that should be spoken to one another, but instead it's about one another. And pastors are just worn out. I mean, they're absolutely worn out and hopeless. And then what happens is it's like I call it high school dating. It's like high school dating. So the pastor wants to leave. So he starts talking to 3 or 4 different churches, and it's kind of like asking a girl to the prom. And he knows the one that he wants to go to, but he's going to keep these other 3 ready. And then churches need a new pastor, and they do the same thing. And so finally they find somebody, and everybody's euphoric. The pastoral couple comes in and go, "This is exactly what we've been looking for." And the church said, "This is our couple. This is them." 3 years later, the same stuff happens. And it's because we're not paying attention to loving one another well. And to me, that it's most pastors, all you got to do is read Barna. He's got all the statistics, and they're jarring. 50% of all pastors who have been pastors for more than 5 years say that if there's anything else they could do to earn a living, they would.
Wow. Amazing.
And I believe that. I've been in just the sad situations. And sometimes we have a success. We've had a lot of success. Sometimes it's just been sad. It's been, I've been, by the time I get through, I'm not a consultant. I don't have a formula. I just get into their lives, into the lives of the leaders, and try to help. But I'm sure you feel this about some of the men you work with, the young men you work with in Africa. Pretty soon they're like your kids.
Yeah.
And then when they just get so abused or so discouraged and they tap out, it can really, but we have good stories to tell too. Really, really good stories of churches that were almost going to split and now are doing great and they're healthy. And so, yeah, but that's what I want to do. That's what Judy and I are doing with our life now.
Well, I think you have a real gift for that. From what I hear, you really have a gift in discerning where people are coming from, where they should be going, what their motives are. And maybe somebody's listening here and their church is going through a tough time, they could contact you. We'll put all that contact information.
Yeah, please. Please do. And I never know exactly what I'm going to do till I talk with you.
Well, I'm sure everything's unique. Every situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Ed, it's called Recentered is what you're devoting your life to now.
Yeah, recenteredgroup.com.
Recenteredgroup.com.
Yeah. Yeah, recenteredgroup.com. That's what I'm doing.
We'll
Yeah.
put that information in the text. People will have it. So, and also you're working with the Free Grace Alliance, which we're happy to see you
I
do
am.
that.
Yeah. I'm on the board. Thanks. The only way I got hooked in was, everybody needs to know this. Charlie called me and he said, will you speak at our conference? And I said, yeah, but I don't want to be involved. And really, it was in Dallas. I only went to that conference for two reasons. One is I could stay with one of my best friends, Dave Burchett, who's now on the board of Recentered. And two, I got to see Charlie. I hadn't seen Charlie for a long time. So when I got there, I realized, hey, I really want to be a part of this. So yeah, I'm working with Free Grace Alliance. I'm on the board. And I believe in what we do. And so thanks for launching that, buddy. Really, thanks for launching that.
Well,
Yeah.
whatever, by God's grace, but you've been a champion of grace all your life, and quite a spokesman. It's reflected in your writing and your speaking, and people, I'm sure, can access your sermons too from Church of the Open Door. I'm sure probably they have archived sermons.
Yeah, we've got some archived ones on our website. Not so much from Church of the Open Door.
But your website offers a lot of teaching and outlines.
It's all over. And if a pastor calls me and says, "Hey, I'm teaching Mark," I'll just and I want to teach it from a grace perspective, I just send him all my notes. I have no desire to be famous and no desire to get credit. That's a pretty good place to live. So, when you're 73, what else do you have to do except just try to help people? So,
amen. We'll give God the credit anyway.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
We all work for the same boss.
Yeah, we do. We do. Yeah. Amen. He's a good boss. He really is a good boss. Yeah.
He is good.
Yeah.
Well, give people some hope for if they're going through a real difficult time as pastor, or as you did with your illness. Give a final word of hope for them.
Yeah, what I would say is, if you're a pastor and you're struggling along, two things. One is, or if you're sick and it's the diagnosis, or your marriage, just whatever it is, just remember, grace takes the long view. Grace takes the long view. And John 11:40, if you believe, just trust God for today, trust him for tomorrow. And those of you who are sick, I know exactly how it feels if you don't know you're going to wake up the next day. And I just remember thinking, I'm as alive today as anybody. So I'm going to trust him with this day. And then also, for those of you who are pastors, if you're lonely, if you don't feel safe, it's probably because you're not. I know I can help you. And I've helped some by saying, you're just in a bad place. It doesn't seem like it's ever going to get any better. Let's have a healthy exit. But most of the time, I want to help them establish a good culture. So the main thing I would say is grace takes the long view, and there's always hope with Jesus. People ask me, since I've been doing this, Charlie, they'll say, how do you feel about the church? Well, the first thing I'm going to say is the church is pretty jacked up. It just is. Second thing I would say is I love the church more now than I ever did before. Because, man, when healthy leaders are leading from the strength, from the influence of their person and not the power of their position, and when they're influencing others by making disciples, and you get that going, man, it's like the book of Acts. Nothing can stand against it. Nothing can stand against the Church of Jesus Christ.
Amen. Ed, those are good words to end with. We appreciate those. And it kind of gives people insights into your wisdom of dealing with these issues. And hopefully, if they have some issues, they can get a hold of you. So thanks for being with us here. Thanks for being with us.
Good talking with you, Charlie. Bye-bye. Yeah.
Well, you've heard Ed's story, and he happened to come in a sweep of what is called the Jesus movement during a particular time in history. But if you're not sure about where you're going to spend eternity, think about some of the things he said, how his life has more than radically changed. It's hard to imagine somebody's life could be so different from what it started with and in his teenage years in the 60s. And it's all wrapped up in the gospel of Jesus Christ, who came, died, who loved us, died for our sins, rose from the dead, so that if we trust in him and not our own doing, not our own performance, not our own good deeds, not our own law keeping, rule keeping, but we trust in him and him alone. We can live forever with him. That's the hope that we have. So thanks for listening. Give us a comment, give us a rating, share this podcast with others. There's some pastors and people that need to hear this. Just share it with others. You can just copy the link and share it, and hope to hear from you. God bless until all hear.
Thank you for listening. For more resources, or to help spread the message of God's life-changing grace, visit our website at gracelife.org. We'd love to hear from you. Send us a message at simplybygrace@gracelife.org. See you next time.